is mine.
While the world braced for Hollywood to bring the walking, or sometimes mummified, dead back to life, there was a really weird mummy story playing out on weekday afternoons at the time. That weird show was about 4 ancient Egyptian bodyguards brought back from the dead and charged with defending a young orphaned boy holding the spirit of a long-deceased pharaoh, which made it both strange and surprisingly emotional. It vanished, and remarkably, few were worse for it. Some say it barely made an entire decade, or possibly that was me dreaming anyway, and then it was forgotten forever. So, after disappearing off the air and into the abyss of obscure 90s kids TV with no finale, how could Mummies Alive have possibly ended? A cartoon built on borrowed momentum. If you happen to experience the late 90s, you'll know what I mean when I say the fascination with ancient Egypt was quite intense. From the big screen to your television and down to your favorite action figures, there were just mummies everywhere. Any scenario that was tied to bandages, the paranormal, or the opening of an ancient sarcophagus had the possibility of becoming the next major franchise. Of course, given the circumstances, this means that DIC Entertainment saw it and decided that what the world needed was a lineup of superhero mummies. Which, let's be honest, is pretty much what Mummies Alive is all about. It all starts thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, when the evil sorcerer Scarab kills Prince Rapsis. Why? Because he wants to live forever. Case closed? Nope. Thousands of years later, Rapsis comes back to our world, alive and young in the form of Presley Carnivant, a 12-year-old boy residing in modern-day San Francisco. However, his return is immediately threatened by Scarab's return as well, and he'll do anything to finally succeed in killing Rapsis. Presley isn't truly alone, though. The mummified remains of the 4 great protectors that watched over Rapsis, Jakal, Roth, Armon, and Nefertina, awaken and vow to give the young prince their undying protection. Frankly, the concept is perfect for a cartoon, but here's where things start getting a bit interesting. If any of what I've said sounds a bit familiar, that's because I'm not the first one to have said it. In fact, a lot of Mummies Alive genetic structure is very similar to a certain other successful Disney cartoon that came out a few years earlier. Yeah, man, I'm talking about gargoyles. Don't ask me how, but the siblings Eric and Julio Lewald, who majorly produced and wrote for Mummies Alive as well as Gargoyles, knew what they were doing. What a good job they did in combining so many ingredients that would later make Mummies Alive so incredibly cool that you shouldn't be so surprised at yourself anymore with all that common ground. Mummified guards from the Stone Age that suddenly rise and become familiar with the 21st century? Check. An ancient evil wanting his pound of flesh and acting on schemes that he decided to pause for millennia? Check. A gang of weird, but badass, supernatural guardians tasked with keeping a defenseless child safe? Check. Got it. But hey, it wasn't only borrowing from other cartoons, as it did manage to establish its own universe and mythos, but from there, the story goes further. 10 weeks and out. Now, I'm pretty sure this was the piece of information that jumped out at me the most when researching Mummies Alive. Truly, there wasn't any period where the show was trying to build the audience for good or bad. It barely had a chance. The show actually premiered on September 15th, 1997, and was no more on November 25th. And this is all for 42 episodes, which ran on what I consider a pretty tight schedule as it is. If that's not blowing your mind thinking about how that could have happened, it was on my mind thinking, yeah man, how could that happen? The main reason was how the show was run on television, because it wasn't like the new Saturday morning cartoons that run once an episode, because it would have been televised to run one new episode to show each consecutive day of the week from Monday to Thursday. Then when running for 42 episodes, it could have run on for more of the school year. Frankly, it does make me wonder if any new members really heard of it or started following in those first 2 weeks, because it's rather possible, probable even, that this would have gone unnoticed until the whole show was already finished airing. It really doesn't give you good lead time at all if you look at your marketing to get more attention. And it really is quite tragic actually, because to make you believe me on why, DIC Entertainment did not treat this as a throwaway kind of cartoon to make any of their current shows any more popular. It really looks as though the animators thought about creating Egyptian legends as gods like Geb, Set, Bastet, Anubis, and Sekhmet, rather than just relying on a good old monster of the week. Not every episode is made perfectly. It may not surprise all of you who know it was pretty much unheard of from the beginning, but really, this must have turned out to be a little more successful than we knew, considering all the input the cartoon produced for its first and final acts of episodes. The plan for a season 2 that never came. Now, for the part that's actually kind of heartbreaking. As you know, Mummies Alive finished a full season of 42 episodes. We also knew there was at least one idea for a season 2, just, it never happened. The bad news is that in this case, there really isn't a singular reason you could point at to say why they didn't follow up a completed series with an expanded world and a more solid future. Now, obviously in the production books, there are no scripts that spell out that's why. It retreats into that foggy gray area of internet rumors, which again is probably not a shocker to anyone either who isn't completely floored that another season got canceled for a show that had so many other producing decisions that the series had to be produced in about 10 weeks. You didn't even really give the viewers enough time to be aware of the program and watch to see where it might end up a week at a time. And on top of that, Mummies Alive didn't have any leverage to speak of behind its own back. The late 90s were rough. They didn't have any big movie tie-ins to bring attention to the proceedings or move merchandise out. It was all on its own. There simply wasn't enough product to justify another outing in a brief period like this. While we can't exactly prove that either, both point to an unfortunate reality. Show me the mummy, a finale that wasn't trying to be one. After all this talk, what exactly happened in the conclusion of Mummies Alive? The truth is, it didn't try to. The final episode, titled Show Me the Mummy, which aired on November 25th, 1997, was the 42nd and thus final installment in the series. But instead of delivering one final showdown between the gang and Scarab or giving Presley and the mummies the proper heroic farewell they deserved, the episode provides a lot more toned-down adventure. It follows a more down-to-earth premise, starring a well-intentioned police officer by the name of Joe, who suspects the mummy's existence and starts conducting a radio show to have listeners submit their own real-life mummy experiences. The framing device enables the episode to be retrospective through the eyes of people who may have encountered the mummies throughout the show, and allows for revisions of some of the show's best adventures: the Doe Monster and Kid Scarab, the gladiatorial battle in Body Slam, and the show that the mummies held in the dark and shrieky nightclub. Bix Bingsley, the recurring fanboy, actually calls into Joe's radio show to give him his own take on when Nefertina kissed him in the True Believer episode. The mummies are discussed one last time after this, and the radio show ends. And so does the episode. And that, in fact, might be what's most interesting about Show Me the Mummy. It wasn't a cliffhanger, and it wasn't meant to serve as a climactic ending of some sort. It was merely a lighthearted clip show looking back fondly at the highlights from the series, rather than bringing any of its stories to a dramatic conclusion. No final confrontation with Scarab, no satisfactory solution of Presley's quest for his identity as Prince Rapsus. And it's readily apparent that there's no desire on the writer's part to tie up loose ends, just an understanding of the fact that there needed to be some closure for a season, not a series. As was standard for other such 90s cartoons, this particular entry was a straightforward clip show episode that was used as nothing but an inexpensive season fodder. No grand fight against Scarab at the end of the show, no putting an end to Presley's use of his alias, no definitive answer to the story's mythology. So many mysteries were never addressed. By default, after the planned second season failed to see the light of day, Show Me the Mummy became the show's final installment. In the simplest of terms, Mummies Alive never completed its story from the outset. What was left completely unresolved. So, after all this, you may be eager to find out how things play out and the ending, but there isn't much. And this is really the greatest problem with Mummies Alive. There's no conclusion. There's simply no ending. Take, for example, the villain of the series, the utterly brilliant Scarab. From the opening episode, his sole motivation is to steal Presley's life force and achieve true immortality with no chance of being overthrown. Naturally, the series, one would imagine, culminates in one big showdown with Scarab defeated once and for all. Except that it doesn't. His story just abruptly concludes. It seems that Presley too can't make it to the end of his story. Although throughout the entire series he slowly grows to accept being the prince of the resurrected Rapsus, and grows to see why the mummies are so willing to die for his life, the series never quite sees him arrive at this full stage of realization. It seems less like we've arrived at the end of Presley's character development and more like we caught him halfway through it. But the secondary characters can't claim to be at the end of their stories either. Nefertina and Apep continue as they began, with their relationship never developing from where it began, even though it could have been expanded upon very easily. The two-brother relationship between the mummies Jaquel and his brother Arak also felt like an intended climax to the three-part Family Feud story arc. Frankly, this would have probably served well as a finale to the whole series had the writers known it was coming to a close. But that wasn't quite the end of Mummies Alive either. To this day, there exists Mummies Alive: The Legend Begins, released on the VHS format by Buena Vista Home Entertainment. The title's quite deceptive, for this release actually consists of just 3 edited together episodes from the series, turned into a single feature-length release. So although the series was to go on briefly longer for reasons not entirely explained, An ending was never to follow for its fans. And for that exact reason, I think that we still remember Mummies Alive so dearly. This isn't a series that's concluded, it's a series that ran out of steam. The cast behind the wrappings. Something that Mummies Alive didn't skimp on was the voice casting for this series. In the lead is Bill Switzer as Presley Carnarvon, just an average kid who unexpectedly comes to learn that he's the rebirth of the immortal Prince Rapsis. The mummies themselves come across very well with a solid group of voice actors. Dale Wilson voiced the level-headed Jakal, Scott McNeil was the red-hot Wrath, the mighty Armon was brought to us by Grammy Kingston, and Nefertina, the fearless female warrior of the team, was voiced by Cree Summer. And chances are, if you're more than a casual animation fan, you may recognize a few of these names from elsewhere. Both Cree Summer and Scott McNeil have made quite a name for themselves in the cartoons of the 90s and beyond, well before and long after Mummies Alive came and went. And on the other end of the spectrum, there was Gerard Plunkett, who, as Scarab, gave such a commanding larger-than-life persona as would seem appropriate for an immortal sorcerer. Pauline Newsted also provided much of the character for Heka, Scarab's snarky snake familiar. Frankly, and as is always a little shady in this case, that's precisely what makes the series a little bittersweet. When you look at the talented voice cast, the grand ambition of the stories, and the effort poured into the show, it's hard not to feel that Mummies Alive was more than just some average disposable cartoon. This show had talented individuals working on it, and it just never had a chance to live. Why a genuinely ambitious show still disappeared? Why did Mummies Alive disappear so quickly? It's not like they had written themselves into a corner, or that they had no more stories to tell. Show Me the Mummy was not the ultimate series finale you never saw coming. In fact, it was just the opposite. By most reports, Mummies Alive was supposed to stick around. There was talk of a second season, plots that set up other confrontations, and not much intent to tie up loose ends with Show Me the Mummy. Instead, that discussion would forever be only a what if after the ratings for Mummies Alive came in below what the networks were looking for to earn it a second run. The funny thing here though, remember how short the season was? With 42 episodes delivered in approximately 10 weeks, it was almost impossible for a brand new show to establish itself on the air, even with an established base to start with, which Mummies Alive did not have. Plus, it had to establish itself not just on television as a whole, but in first-run syndication and with a very crowded entertainment landscape. To place blame solely on the scheduling, however, isn't something we can confirm. No source confirms that directly either. Still, in shows like these, we can at least give you an idea of the climate it had to contend with. A brand new show without an established property or franchise under a difficult schedule. So how come it's still recalled with so much warmth? Well, in many regards, it actually deserves it. This wasn't a slapdash series that some cheap bean counter made as an excuse for a cartoon. The show had a compelling setup, embraced ancient Egyptian mythology in a way that very few others did, and possessed an experienced team of voice actors who could give depth to a group of archaeologists as a result. Maybe this is the reason we all remember the show. Not for some meaningful and poignant series-ending statement, instead for Show Me the Mummy, and the fact that there was never a series finale. The quiet afterlife. And then, radio silence. The series ended abruptly, only for one last hurrah from the show on home video. In April 1998, Mummies Alive: The Legend Begins was released on VHS by Buena Vista Home Entertainment. And while the title suggests new and continuing adventures for the Egyptian heroes, what we essentially got was a compilation release. It consisted of 3 Mummies Alive episodes, spliced together and released as a feature film. The series may have just taken one last jaunt to the video store shelves around the world, but its story didn't progress further. The show didn't receive the follow-ups enjoyed by many of its mid-90s cartoon brethren. No reboot, no spin-off, no canon-approved comic picking up the baton where the TV show left off. The history of this particular piece of television, from what I can gather anyway, ends with its television run. It wasn't, however, a forgotten treasure. Far from it. The Mummies Alive series lives on because the fans continue to breathe life into it. They stream the series on video-sharing websites, keep active wikis dedicated to it, engage on various internet forums, and host compilations of the show on YouTube. As such, its audience may never expand, but these efforts to keep the series from being unremembered by the general public have kept its memory alive to some extent. While Mummies Alive may not have ended up with the enduring, long-running franchise legacy that's common among certain other cartoon properties of the time, it instead achieved something else. Its dedicated contingent of fans, people for whom the show's events are still worth discussing some 3 decades later. There's really not much of a way to look back at the end of Mummies Alive if it wasn't written with an end in mind that doesn't really happen in terms of the plot. The canceled second season doesn't provide closure to some imagined master scheme. Really, it's just the characters were left in the middle of the mythos, and the creators moved on to another gig when their gig got yanked. Perhaps its ability to remain memorable is owed to the fact that it never had the satisfying wrap-up that many shows strive to achieve or deserve. It's a show worth remembering but not for the conclusion to events, but for what it could have been. Let us know your thoughts on Mummies Alive in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any more of our. Stay safe, have a great one.